It seems like yesterday when I think back to the day I met him. With a notebook tucked under my arm and a new semester underway, I was an excited young person dreaming of becoming a top-tier designer in a college that was bursting with activity. And then there was Jake, all charisma and lofty aspirations, talking loudly about how one election might change the world. We had an instant connection as two driven individuals who just cared about our future. "Hey, you're in my intro to design class, right?" He'd inquired as he caught up to me on the campus walkway, exchanging huge smiles. With a cheeky edge to my voice, I shot back, "Yeah, that's me," attempting to make sense of it all. "I get it. But hey, if you ever need a study buddy or someone to run ideas by, I'm your guy." His confidence was extraordinary, nearly to the point where it was easy to forget he was just a student like myself. It was us against the world from that point on. He would often talk endlessly about political theories over coffee and textbooks, while I would scribble in the margins of my notes. As a team, nothing seemed insurmountable to us. "We're going to do really well, Anida. I promise." On those exhausting nights, he said, "You'll be designing national galleries, and I'll be right there, maybe as governor, making sure the arts get the funding they deserve." His eyes shone with a mix of ambition and naivete. "And what about the children? White picket fence. What is it?" I mocked, seeing his expression. He would gesture dismissively. "No, not for us. Plans are larger than this. When you can own the entire city, who needs a fence?" Everything was very romantic in the idealistic, carefree sense of youth. We had a little ceremony with only a few friends and relatives before we graduated. It felt appropriate, like we weren't simply getting married, but embarking on an adventure together. Being newlyweds, we had no limits. In a short period of time, Jake rose from assistant to aide to the governor to director of parks and recreation. It seems as though he was receiving new recognition or moving up the professional ladder every month. He was always the center of attention, shaking hands and kissing infants like a pro. It was different at home. "How was your day?" became our go-to opening line for discussions. He would say, "Busy as hell, meetings back to back." "How about you, sweetheart? How is your treatment in the design world?" I would shrug, seeming casual. "Oh, just another day of picking colors and convincing clients I know best." Though his eyes were always far away from mine, he would still laugh. Considering that we were both working hard, I didn't mind. I returned home one evening with my head spinning from closing a significant contract that would position our department as leaders in the field. I was worn out, and my shoulders hurt from carrying my laptop bag around all day. Jake was home already, something that was becoming less common these days. I sealed the deal with Johnson. The presentation went off without a hitch. I declared, attempting to share a small portion of my day and searching for a glimmer of mutual enthusiasm. Jake remarked, "That's nice, babe," without taking his eyes off the papers strewn all over the living room. "Listen, since today was less demanding, could you prepare dinner?" I barely had time for lunch because I had so many meetings back to back. Half off, I hesitated at the doorway. Lighter day kept repeating in my thoughts. More light? "Jake, we fought for 8 hours to get a deal that will increase our revenue for the whole year." When he did look up, he shrugged and met my eyes. "Yes, but are you really in the trenches all the time? All it takes is choosing colors and persuading others to agree with your viewpoints." The tone of dismissal hurt more than I thought it would. "Jake, it goes a little beyond that. We had a major victory with this." With a muttered, sure, he returned to his papers. "But can you actually manage dinner?" I'm worn out. His casual comments overshadowed my victory, leaving me with a bad taste in my mouth as I made my way to the kitchen. After a few weeks, the pattern persisted. At work, I was moving up the ladder and earning more money and responsibilities at every step. I had conflicting emotions the day I learned that my pay had exceeded Jake's. Knowing his mental state at the moment made me hesitant to tell him about it even though I wanted to. At last, during a dinner, I'd brought up the subject, making an effort to keep it light-hearted. It appears that I may be out-earning you this year with the new accounts I brought in. It's funny, huh? With an indiscernible grimace, Jake set down his fork. Are you serious? Is that the method you intend to discuss it? His tone perplexed me, so I scowled. Jake, bring what up? The news is good. It indicates that both of us are doing well. It isn't us, Anita. You are the one. I now have to figure out how to take charge. I can't let people believe I'm incapable of providing. Attempting to close the distance his comments had caused, I reached across the table. It's not a competition, Jake. Our money is set aside for our future. Shaking his head, he withdrew his hand. It's not really that easy. I think this is significant, but you don't comprehend it. His remarks were like a slap in the face, undermining not only my work, but also our collaboration. Jake, I felt like we were in this together. When did it start to focus only on you? Ever since I became the one left behind, he shot back, raising his voice. There you are, out-earning me now with your clever deals. What does that mean about me? It makes you my husband. I uttered in a forceful yet gentle tone, not my competitor. Jake snorted and got up quickly. I have to consider this. Consider exploring alternative options, perhaps one with a higher salary. I felt the distance grow as I watched him leave. It was about respect, understanding, and support, elements that were increasingly lacking in our conversations, rather than money or success. I turned over the conversation of the day as I lay in bed that night. We were sharing a roof, but our paths seemed to be leading us to different places entirely. Though I wasn't sure what or how at the time, I knew something had to give. All I knew was that I could not let his fears to control me or our pleasure. But resolving that, I was still puzzled by that puzzle. After 15 years of marriage, our life was an exhibit of external success, a gorgeous home, well-maintained vehicles, a few properties scattered throughout the city, and bank accounts that would make anyone jealous. However, not everything that shines is made of gold, and Jake felt that the shine was beginning to fade. After working for the Natural Resources Agency for a considerable amount of time, his career seemed to be stuck in mud, spinning its wheels but not moving forward. I would sit through another long, drunken evening listening to him yell, Anita, everything is rigged. The guys who can't distinguish a policy from a pancake are going to get the positions I deserve. It's all about who you know, or who you know. You know, he would complain while taking a swig. I did my best to provide answers rather than just a listening ear. Have you considered going out with someone? One evening, while clearing the dinner dishes and refilling his glass, I offered that a therapist would be of assistance. Jake struck the table with his fist, causing the silverware to fly. Anita, I don't need a shrink. The corruption and cronyism I have to deal with on a daily basis is the issue, not me. I pressed on, feeling the weight of his aggravation as my own. But maybe talking to someone could help you cope better or even strategize how to get around those obstacles. I said, will you just put it down? I am aware of my duties. It's the system that needs to change, not me. No matter how hard I tried, I was unable to get past his fury. So I concentrated on my career, which I could control. Leading my squad in international displays, I was creating waves. Major contracts were featuring my designs as their focal point. At work, I was valued and my opinions counted, which felt really fantastic. But Jake withdrew even further as I prospered. He stopped coming to work functions with me, especially the large, flashy ones where my accomplishments were on display. "Why don't you attend tomorrow night's gala?" One evening, I asked him, trying not to seem too serious. I would find great meaning in it. Additionally, the CEO will be present, so you might network. With a resolute expression on his face, Jake raised his gaze from his laptop. "And what's that?" "Remain motionless as all eyes acclaim you. These days, I think they only recognize me as Mr. Anita." "That is untrue." I responded with a stab of pain in my chest. "Jake, you are my spouse. They appreciate that you are an individual." He snorted and snapped shut his laptop. "Yes, Anita. I'm just the man who holds your handbag to them. I've got better things to do, so no thanks." I didn't want to admit how much it hurt. Although I was happy with my accomplishments, I wanted my spouse to be by my side and enjoy the achievement together, not feel jealous of it. I experienced a mixture of emotions when I put on my evening gown and glanced in the mirror the following day. My reflection revealed a woman who, while professionally fulfilled, lacked her husband's support in a big way on a personal level. I went alone, as I had started to do more often. The gala was a blur of congratulations, handshakes, and bright smiles. I accepted the accolades and spoke about my latest designs, but each time I saw a couple together, laughing or sharing a quiet moment, my heart ached. Returning home, I found Jake on the couch, a bottle in hand, not even pretending to have waited up. The clock was ticking past 9:00 p.m. as I rushed out of the conference room, my phone dead from the day's back-to-back meetings. My mind was racing with the discussions we'd had, but a nagging thought about Jake waiting at home made my heart race faster. We hadn't spoken since the morning, and I knew he'd be wondering where I was. I drove home as quickly as I could, rehearsing an apology in my mind. But when I walked through the front door, the coldness in Jake's eyes told me no apology would suffice. "You're late," he stated flatly, his voice edged with accusation as he sat in the dimly lit living room. "I'm sorry, Jake. The meeting ran over, and my phone died. I didn't get a chance to call." I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, my voice weary. "Meeting, huh? Where should I say?" "Your little party with the bosses." His words were sharp, his eyes narrowing. I was taken aback. "What are you talking about?" "It was just a regular business meeting, Jake." "Sure it was. I bet it's all those late nights with them that got you where you are. Not your talent, just playing up to the bosses." His voice was bitter, and he took a swig from the bottle next to him. My cheeks flushed with anger and disbelief. "You think I got my promotions by what? Sleeping around? How can you even say that?" He laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room. "Oh, come on, Anita. It's obvious. Why else would they promote you, a woman, over others?" The accusation stung, and I felt a mix of hurt and fury. I'd earned my position with hard work and talent. It's disgusting that you think so low of me. Jake stood up abruptly, his body swaying slightly. "You're never here, always working, leaving me alone. And we don't even have kids because you're too busy with your career." His words were like slaps, each one hitting hard. "I can't believe you're blaming me for no kids. We agreed on this, Jake. My career is not an excuse for your unhappiness or failures." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "My failures?" No, Anita. They're because I married someone who cares more about her job than her husband. You've ruined everything. I tried to keep my voice calm. Jake, this isn't us. We're both upset. Maybe we should talk about this in the morning when you're sober. No, I'm done. I need to be alone. He grabbed his keys and headed toward the door. Jake, wait. But he was already gone, the door slamming behind him. I tried calling him several times, but it went straight to voicemail. Alone in the house, I wandered from room to room, each one echoing with the ghosts of earlier, happier times. I couldn't sleep. The couch was cold and unwelcoming, his accusations replaying in my mind. The morning after Jake stormed out, I dragged myself to work. My eyes were red from a sleepless night, my mind swirling with the harsh words and the slam of the door echoing in my ears. I was on autopilot, nodding and smiling where needed, but inside, I felt like I was crumbling. Mid-morning, my boss called me into his office. I straightened my blazer and tried to compose myself, wiping away the last traces of tears. Anita, I got something that might interest you, he said, his tone more upbeat than I could handle at that moment. How would you like to head our new project in Milan? It's a big opportunity, international exposure, leading a team. I thought of you immediately. Milan, Italy had always been a dream, one of those places I'd promised myself I'd visit one way or another. Under different circumstances, I would have jumped at the chance, no second thoughts. That sounds incredible, sir. I managed, a genuine smile breaking through the fog of my sadness. It's actually a dream of mine to work in Milan. Great. I knew you'd be excited. Think it over and let me know your decision. Returning home, I found Jake sitting at the kitchen table, looking sober but somber. The air between us was thick with unsaid words. I hesitated at the doorway, then decided to breach the silence. Jake, we need to talk. I was offered a major project today. It's in Milan. I began, watching his reaction closely. He looked up, his face hardening. Milan, huh? And what? You're just going to go? It's a big deal for my career, Jake. It could change everything for us, for me. I want to take it. I tried to keep my voice steady, assertive. There's no us in this, Anita. It's always about you and your career. His voice rose, a bitter edge slicing through the quiet of the kitchen. I'm still the same person, Jake. I'm still your wife. Why can't you see this as something good for both of us? I pleaded, hoping for some sliver of understanding. There is no both of us. If you choose to go to Milan, it's me or the job. Anita, decide. His ultimatum hung in the air, stark and cold. Why do you make me choose, Jake? Why can't you be happy for me? My voice cracked, frustration and pain bubbling up. Because I need to know where I stand. Either you're with me, or you're there living your dream without me. He was yelling now, his face red with anger. I took a deep breath, my mind made up, heart aching. I choose Milan. I have to do this, Jake, not just for my career, but for myself. Jake stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile floor. He stormed to our bedroom and came back with a stack of papers, divorce papers, slamming them down on the table. He met my eyes with cold finality. Then this is it, Anita. If you go, we're done. My heart sank as I gazed at the documents and then at him, yet something inside of me hardened. Not even for him could I give up on my aspirations. The following week was a haze. I quickly packed my luggage, signed the paperwork, and boarded the jet to Milan. Every corner of the city was a picture-perfect postcard. It was stunning. I was frequently seen on TV talking about the project, my professional demeanor belying my inner distress. Even with all the excitement, my mind kept going back to Jake and the chance of things being better. But every time I took up my phone to give him a call, I was reminded of his warning, and my determination grew. It felt strange to return home after spending 2 weeks in Milan. Yet there he was, Jake, lounging on the sofa as though the previous month had been a small bump in the road. "Anita, you've returned," he said. "Come here," getting up from the couch and holding out his arms while wearing a fake smile. I stepped forward but kept my distance, since I couldn't bear to think about his threats and ultimatums anymore. "Jake, we can't act as like nothing occurred. Remember that ultimatum you gave me? Me or the position?" His voice was light as he waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that. You know, I was just freaked out. However, I'm willing to start afresh because I've had time to reflect. If you'll agree to change, I'm willing to forgive you." My brows furrowed. "Pardon me? For precisely what purpose? For pursuing my line of work? And what modifications are you referring to?" Jake's face became a little more stern. "Anita, you know, give it go and concentrate on us. We could return to our previous state if you would simply listen to me and follow my instructions." Then it dawned on me how utterly ridiculous and manipulative his remarks were. Anger at his insolence mixed with relief that I was finally realizing the manipulation for what it was. "Jake, you can't be serious. You're expecting me to forfeit everything of my hard-earned success. I can't do that, you know that." With a tight, icy laugh, he laughed. "It was worthwhile to try, but I assumed you would understand." I guess I was mistaken. The divorce papers that he had tossed at me before I left were inside my bag when I reached inside it. "Jake, I signed these. Regarding the divorce, I believed you to be sincere. It appears that I was correct." With a faltering smile, he grabbed the papers out of my hand. "Anita, this was merely a joke. Can't you laugh at yourself?" "A jest?" I looked at him, astonished. Divorce threats were a joke. Absurd. Jake's voice rose as his face flushed. "Anita, you're making a grave error. This is something you'll regret. I will not allow you to simply leave and wreck everything. I'm not causing any damage. I'm preserving myself," I stated strongly. "You've made it apparent how I feel about you. I have to move on at this point." With a fierce voice, he towered over me. "All right. However, you're not leaving with anything. This is my home and possessions. You take off empty-handed. I'll see to it that everyone learns how you achieve success. I'll obliterate you." My heart was racing, but I responded calmly. "Try it, and it'll backfire. I have not acted improperly. I have a clear conscience." I went to our bedroom and packed my things, including my design portfolios, personal documents, and a few clothes. The rest was irrelevant. Things were replaceable, but self-respect and peace of mind were not. I headed to my lawyer's office the morning after leaving the house, a flurry of plans and feelings racing through my head. Upon entering Mr. Carter's office, I noticed that he was examining some documents with his glasses resting on the tip of his nose. With a solemn gaze, he looked up. "It's lovely to see you, Anita. Please take a seat. Tell me everything." Taking a deep breath, I began to recall the events of the past several days, including all of the nasty remarks and threats that Jake had directed at me. I said, sounding more composed than I actually was, and then he told me he'd make sure I wouldn't get a penny and would ruin my reputation. Mr. Carter listened and took notes, his brow furrowed. "Anita, we have to treat this seriously. Have you given hiring a private investigator any thought? We may discover information that will be useful to us in court. I laughed bitterly, which surprised even me. Mr. Carter, I'm ahead of you there. A few months ago, when things really started to go south, I hired one. I wasn't comfortable with what was going on behind my back. I reached into my purse, took out a folder containing papers and pictures, and gave it to him. This is where everything is. It appears that Jake has abused people verbally as well. Mr. Carter unfolded the folder and started going through the contents very carefully. His look as he thumbed through the pictures and reports went from worried to downright shocked. This is substantial proof, Anita. He has accepted bribes in exchange for approving specific city projects. He gestured to a picture. And this as well. He gestured to a picture of him and his helper at an unprofessional gathering. Yes, and she has been more than just an assistant for quite some time, I said, with a mixture of relief and guilt. Mr. Carter looked at me through his glasses as he leaned back and pressed his fingers together. Everything is changed by this. We may have extra grounds for divorce in addition to a compelling case based on adultery. This evidence, along with his threats against you, could tip the scales in your favor. The days before the trial were stressful. Jake started to call more frequently and urgently. He would swear at my name and then beg me to come back. I kept track of every voicemail and missed call that I received. When the hearing started, Mr. Carter was unyielding. Your Honor, we have sufficient evidence here pertaining to Mr. Thompson's criminal acts relating to his position at the Natural Resources Agency, in addition to his infidelity, which has crushed my client. As Mr. Carter unfolded paper after document and photo after photo, all the while reliving his threats against me, Jake's face became white. When Jake's turn came around, he attempted to refute the allegations. These are all unfounded charges. She's jealous and trying to destroy my career. The judge was unimpressed when she peered over the rim of her glasses. We have a good deal of evidence in front of us, Mr. Thompson. Could you please clarify these pictures and these transactions? His voice wavered, his customary charm crumbling beneath the weight of indisputable evidence. Just going about my business. Those images are not relevant. However, it was already too late. The proof was overwhelming. The judge paused for a moment before speaking, her voice clear and powerful. In light of the evidence, I am providing Mrs. Thompson with monetary compensation to ease the suffering brought on by the infidelity and threats. The property will be divided equally. I finally put the past behind me and pushed myself into my profession with a zeal I hadn't felt in years. My hard work eventually paid off, and I received an offer to become the creative director. It fulfilled a dream. For years, I had eyed. My closest friend Laura and I were out enjoying this new beginning at a quaint little cafe downtown when my phone chimed. My heart no longer skipped a beat when I saw Jake's name on screen. I murmured to Laura, it's Jake, and held up the phone. She inquired, raising an eyebrow with that all too familiar, "Are you serious?" expression. "Are you going to answer it?" she said. I said, "When do you want?" Jake, giving in to my curiosity. "Hello, Anita. I've been pondering. I recognized that I had erred greatly. Can we get together? I want to discuss the possibility of beginning anew." A mixture of desperation and feebly sincere sound, Jake's voice emerged from the speaker. I couldn't resist laughing out loud. It was more of a, "Can you believe this guy?" kind of laugh than a happy one. Make a fresh start? Assume that, Jake. Following everything? Anita, everything has changed. I lost my job. She accepted everything, including the job, and now she refuses to return the gifts as well. In his rush, his words tumbled over one other. I'm left with nothing. I shook my head, continuing to laugh. So to be clear, you want to start again since she fired you and stole your job, right? That is quite wealthy. You don't get it, Jake. Anita? I've changed. I truly have, I begged. I've moved on, even if that's true. Now that I'm a creative director, my life is content and fulfilled even without you, I remarked, the finality in my voice reflecting the resolution in my heart. There's no place for you in it anymore. But Anita, I wish you the best. Jake, goodbye. I switched off my phone, hung up, and blocked his number. Laura had a proud smile on her face as she looked at me. Raising her wine glass in a toast, she asked, You really are over him, aren't you? Yes, exactly, I replied as I clinked her glass with mine. To new beginnings, and to being in charge of my own happiness. The following day, I felt strong and in need of company that just asked for love in return. So I made the decision to grow my small family. When I visited the neighborhood shelter, I noticed a rumpled terrier mix. Like me, he was a little older and a little rough around the edges. It felt appropriate to adopt him. I gave him the name Buddy, since I knew he would be a loyal buddy without any strings attached. Life was pleasant. It was authentic. It was mine. And there were a lot of opportunities there. Now that I had weathered the storm, I was thriving instead of merely existing.
I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, my hands trembling as I gripped the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines, positive. My heart raced as I tried to process this life-changing news. How would I tell Chris? As if on cue, I heard the front door open. Nora? You home? Chris called out. I quickly shoved the test into my pocket and splashed some water on my face. In here, I managed to reply, my voice shakier than I'd intended. Chris appeared in the doorway, his face etched with worry. Everything okay? You look pale. I forced a smile, just feeling a bit under the weather. How was your interview? He ran a hand through his hair, a telltale sign of stress. It was interesting. Can we talk? We moved to the living room, settling onto our worn couch. Chris took a deep breath. They offered me the job. That's great news, I exclaimed, genuinely happy for him after a year of fruitless job hunting. His expression remained serious. There's a catch, Nora. The position is in Seattle. My stomach dropped. Seattle? But that's across the country. Our whole life is here, my art studio, our friends, your family. I know, Chris said, reaching for my hand, but this is a fantastic opportunity. The salary is double what I was making before, and there's room for growth. I pulled away, standing up to pace the room. What about my career? I've just started to build a name for myself in the local art scene. Chris's eyes pleaded with me. You can paint anywhere, Nora, and with this salary, we could afford a house with a dedicated studio space for you. I felt torn. The pregnancy test weighed heavily in my pocket, a secret that would change everything. I don't know, Chris. It's such a big decision. We don't have to decide right this second, he said, his voice gentle, but they need an answer by the end of the week. Just then, a cry erupted from the baby monitor. Our daughter, Lily, was awake from her nap. I'll get her, Chris offered, standing up. As he left the room, I sank back onto the couch, my mind reeling. How could I uproot our entire life? But how could I ask Chris to turn down this opportunity after struggling for so long? When Chris returned with Lily, her chubby arms reached out for me. I took her, breathing in her sweet baby scent. Mama sad? Lily asked, her big blue eyes studying my face. I kissed her forehead. No, sweetheart, Mama's just thinking. Chris sat beside us, his arm around my shoulders. We're a team, Nora. Whatever we decide, we'll do it together. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. How could I tell him about the baby now? It would only complicate things further. I have an idea, Chris said suddenly. Why don't we take a drive to that little bed and breakfast we love? We can spend the weekend there, talk things through without any distractions. The thought of escaping, even for a couple of days, was tempting. What about Lily? My mom's been begging for some grandma time. I'm sure she'd be thrilled to watch her. I hesitated, then nodded. Okay, let's do it. As Chris made the arrangements, I excused myself to the bathroom. I pulled out the pregnancy test, staring at those 2 pink lines that had the power to change everything. How could I tell Chris now, with this job offer hanging over us? And how could I not? My mind raced with the possibilities, each scenario more daunting than the last. One thing was certain, this weekend getaway would be anything but relaxing. The moving truck rumbled away, leaving us standing in front of our new home in Seattle. Rain drizzled down, matching my mood perfectly. Chris squeezed my hand, his excitement palpable. This is it, Nora, our fresh start. I forced a smile, my free hand resting on my now visible baby bump. It's different. As we walked up the driveway, a voice called out, "Welcome to the neighborhood." A statuesque blonde in yoga pants jogged towards us, all smiles and bouncing ponytail. "I'm Angela, your next-door neighbor." Chris stepped forward, extending his hand. "Chris, this is my wife, Nora, and our daughter, Lily." Angela's eyes lingered on Chris a beat too long before turning to me. "Oh, and another one on the way. How exciting!" I nodded, suddenly feeling frumpy in my travel-worn clothes. "We're due in 4 months." "Well, if you need anything at all, I'm right next door," Angela said, her hand on Chris's arm. "Anything at all." As she jogged away, Chris chuckled. "Friendly neighbors. That's a good sign, right?" I mumbled agreement, but something about Angela's overly warm welcome left me uneasy. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. Chris threw himself into his new job, often working late. I struggled to find my footing, missing my old art studio and friends. One afternoon, while Lily napped, a knock at the door startled me. It was Angela, holding a plate of cookies. "Thought you might need a pick-me-up," she said, breezing past me into the kitchen. "How are you settling in?" I followed, feeling oddly defensive in my own home. "Fine, thanks. Chris is loving his new job." Angela's eyes sparkled. "Oh, I know. We had lunch yesterday. He's quite the charmer, isn't he?" My stomach clenched. "You had lunch?" "Just a quick bite in the cafeteria," she waved dismissively. "Did he not mention it? Anyway, there's a neighborhood barbecue this weekend. You simply must come." After she left, I stood in the kitchen, Angela's words echoing in my mind. Why hadn't Chris mentioned lunch? That evening, as we ate dinner, I casually asked, "How's work going? Meet any new people?" Chris nodded, mouthful of pasta. "It's great. Everyone's been really welcoming." I waited, but he didn't elaborate. "Anyone in particular?" He shrugged. "Not really. Oh, did I mention there's a company picnic coming up?" I set down my fork. "Actually, Angela invited us to a neighborhood barbecue. Same day, probably." Chris's face lit up. "Perfect. We can do both. The picnic's in the afternoon. We can hit the barbecue after." I pushed my food around my plate. "You seem awfully excited about the barbecue." He reached across the table, taking my hand. "I'm excited about making friends here, Nora. This move was hard on all of us. I want it to work." I nodded, guilt washing over me. Was I being paranoid? The barbecue arrived, and I found myself surrounded by Angela's friends. They were all impossibly fit, sipping wine and trading neighborhood gossip. "Oh, Nora," one woman said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "It must be so hard being pregnant in a new city, and with Chris working such long hours." Another chimed in. "At least he has Angela to keep him company at work. She's such a dear, always looking out for the new employees." My head snapped up. "What do you mean?" The women exchanged glances. "Oh, nothing, dear. It's just nice that he has a friendly face at the office." I scanned the yard, spotting Chris and Angela by the grill, laughing at some private joke. As I watched, she placed her hand on his arm, leaning in close to whisper something. A cold dread settled in my stomach. What was really going on here? As we drove home that night, Chris chatted happily about the new friends we'd made. I stared out the window, my mind racing. "Nora? You okay?" Chris asked, concern in his voice. I turned to him, searching his face. "Chris, is there something you're not telling me?" Chris's face paled at my question. "What do you mean? I've told you everything." I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. "It's just... you and Angela seem awfully close." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Nora, she's just being friendly. You're reading too much into this." I let it drop, but sleep eluded me that night. The next morning, while Chris was in the shower, I did something I'd never done before. I checked his phone. My hands shook as I scrolled through his messages. There it was, a thread with Angela. My heart raced as I opened it. Great seeing you today. Lunch again tomorrow? Absolutely. Same time, same place. Can't wait. You always brighten my day. I felt sick. The messages weren't explicitly romantic, but the familiarity, the frequency, it was all wrong. Chris's footsteps approached. I quickly put the phone down, my mind reeling. Hey, honey, he said, kissing my cheek. I'm heading out. Big presentation today. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Good luck, I managed to choke out. As soon as he left, I burst into tears. Lily toddled over, her little face scrunched with concern. Mama sad? I pulled her close, breathing in her sweet baby scent. No, sweetheart. Mama's okay. But I wasn't okay. Far from it. That afternoon, I took Lily to the park, desperate for a distraction. As she played in the sandbox, I sat on a nearby bench, lost in thought. Mind if I join you? I looked up to see an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair. Please, I gestured to the empty seat. I'm Marianne, she said, settling beside me. You look like you could use a friendly ear. Something about her warmth broke through my defenses. Before I knew it, I was pouring out the whole story. The move, Angela, the text messages. Marianne listened without judgment, her eyes filled with understanding. When I finished, she took my hand. Oh, honey, I've been where you are. What did you do? I asked, desperate for guidance. She smiled sadly. I ignored it, convinced myself I was imagining things. Don't make my mistake, Nora. Trust your instincts. As we talked, Lily ran over, proudly showing off a handful of pebbles. Marianne's face lit up. What a beautiful collection. You must be so proud of your mommy. Lily beamed, then ran back to play. Marianne turned to me, her expression serious. Whatever you decide to do, remember, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for her, too. Her words struck a chord. I thought of the baby growing inside me, of Lily's innocent face. They deserved better than this. But how can I be sure? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Marianne squeezed my hand. You dig deeper, gather evidence, and when you know for certain, you act. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, Chris's phone in my hands. He was working late again, or so he said. With trembling fingers, I opened his location history. My breath caught as I saw an unfamiliar address, visited multiple times over the past weeks. I grabbed my car keys, determination overriding my fear. It was time to see for myself. The address led me to a small apartment complex. As I pulled up, I saw Chris's car parked outside. My heart pounded as I approached the building. Through a ground-floor window, I saw them, Chris and Angela, sitting close on a couch, laughing over glasses of wine. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. It was real. It was all real. As I drove home, tears blurring my vision, one thought echoed in my mind. What am I going to do now? The annual company picnic loomed, and I dreaded every second of it. But I had to go. I needed to see Chris and Angela together with my own eyes. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for everything. As we arrived at the park, Chris squeezed my hand. You okay? You've been quiet lately. I forced a smile. Just tired. The pregnancy, you know. He nodded, distracted by something over my shoulder. Oh, there's Angela. I promised I'd help her set up the volleyball net. Before I could respond, he was gone, jogging towards that familiar blonde ponytail. I watched as they laughed together, their bodies in perfect sync as they worked. Mama, swing! Lily tugged at my hand, pulling me towards the playground. As I pushed Lily on the swing, my eyes never left Chris and Angela. They were always near each other, sharing private jokes, touching casually. It was like watching a dance I wasn't part of. Your husband seems close with Angela, a voice beside me said. It was one of the women from the neighborhood barbecue. I stiffened. They're just colleagues. She raised an eyebrow. If you say so, dear, but if I were you, I'd keep a closer eye on them. Anger flared in my chest. How dare she? But as I opened my mouth to retort, I realized she was right. I needed to know the truth, once and for all. As the afternoon wore on, I lost sight of Chris. Panic rose in my throat. Where was he? Where was Angela? Lisa, can you watch Lily for a minute? I asked another mom. I need to find Chris. I searched the crowded park, my heart pounding. Then I saw them, ducking behind a storage shed at the far end of the field. Without thinking, I followed. As I approached, I heard Angela's lilting laugh. Oh, Chris, you're terrible. You love it, Chris's voice replied, low and intimate. I peered around the corner of the shed, and my world shattered. Chris had Angela pressed against the wall, his lips on her neck, her hands tangled in his hair. A strangled gasp escaped me. They sprang apart, guilt written all over their faces. "Nora!" Chris exclaimed, his face pale. "It's not. This isn't." But I was already running, tears blurring my vision. I heard Chris calling after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I found myself at the playground, scooping up a confused Lily. "We're going home, baby," I choked out. "But Daddy?" she asked, looking around. "Daddy's busy," I said, my voice breaking. As I buckled Lily into her car seat, Chris caught up to us. "Nora, please, let me explain." I whirled on him, fury and pain coursing through me. "Explain what, Chris? How you've been lying to me? How you've been sneaking around with her?" He reached for me, but I jerked away. "Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me." "It was a mistake," he pleaded. "It didn't mean anything. I love you, Nora. You and Lily are my world." I laughed bitterly. "Your world? Is that why you've been spending every spare moment with her?" Chris's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk about this? We can fix this." For a moment, I wavered. I thought of our life together, of Lily, of the baby on the way, but then I remembered the sight of him with Angela, and my resolve hardened. "I don't know if we can fix this, Chris," I said, my voice cold. "I don't know if I want to." As I drove away, leaving Chris standing alone in the parking lot, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. What would I do now? How would I tell Lily? Could I raise 2 children on my own? But beneath the fear and uncertainty, a small voice whispered, "You're stronger than you know. You can do this." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, a plan already forming in my mind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I hadn't slept in days. Chris's desperate calls and messages went unanswered as I grappled with the shattered pieces of my life. Lily's confused tears only deepened my anguish. How could I explain that Daddy wasn't coming home? One particularly rough morning, I found myself back at the park, hoping the fresh air might clear my head. Lily was with my mother, giving me a rare moment alone. "Nora?" a familiar voice called. It was Marianne, the kind older woman I'd met before. "Oh, honey, you look like you've been through hell." The sympathy in her eyes broke something in me. Before I knew it, I was sobbing, pouring out the whole sordid story between gasps. Marianne listened, her face a mix of compassion and anger. When I finished, she took my hands in hers. "You're stronger than you realize, Nora, but you need to be smart about this." "What do you mean?" I asked, wiping my eyes. She leaned in, her voice low. "Men like Chris, they're good at spinning tales. You need hard evidence before you make any decisions." I shook my head. "I saw them together. What more evidence do I need? For yourself? Nothing. But for a divorce, for custody, you need more." Marianne's eyes hardened. "I made the mistake of confronting my ex-husband without proof. He turned it all around on me, made me doubt myself. I won't let that happen to you." Her words sent a chill through me. "What should I do?" "Dig deeper," she said firmly. "Get into his email, his bank statements, follow him if you have to, and don't let on that you know anything." The thought of pretending everything was normal made me sick. "I don't know if I can face him." Marianne squeezed my hand. "You can, and you will, for Lily and for that baby you're carrying. They deserve better, and so do you." As I drove home, Marianne's advice echoed in my mind. Could I really play the role of the unsuspecting wife? The thought of Chris touching me, kissing me, while I knew about Angela made my skin crawl. But as I walked into our house, the house we'd chosen together, filled with memories and dreams, resolve steeled my spine. I would do whatever it took to protect my children and myself. That evening, when Chris came home, I forced myself to greet him with a smile. "Hi, honey. How was work?" The relief on his face was palpable. It was, "Good. Nora, can we talk?" I nodded, my heart racing. "Of course." We sat on the couch, an ocean of unspoken words between us. Chris took a deep breath. "About what happened at the picnic, it was a horrible mistake. Angela means nothing to me. You and Lily are everything." I wanted to scream, to throw his lies back in his face. Instead, I said softly, "I overreacted. I've been so emotional with the pregnancy. Can we just start over?" The hope that bloomed in Chris's eyes made me want to vomit. He pulled me into a hug, murmuring apologies and promises. Over his shoulder, my eyes fell on a framed photo of us with Lily, my beautiful, innocent daughter, my unborn child. They deserved the truth, whatever it might be. In that moment, I made my decision. I would play along, gather evidence, and when the time was right, I would bring it all crashing down. As Chris held me, thinking all was forgiven, I began to plan. I would leave no stone unturned, no secret unexposed. And when I was done, Chris and Angela would regret ever underestimating me. The game was on, and I intended to win. The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception. I played the role of the forgiving wife perfectly, all while gathering evidence with Marianne's help. We combed through bank statements, tracked Chris's movements, and even hired a private investigator. One rainy afternoon, Marianne and I huddled over my laptop, sifting through the latest batch of information from the PI. "Look at this." Marianne pointed to a series of transactions. Regular withdrawals, always the same amount, always on Fridays. My heart sank. The day he claims to work late. Marianne squeezed my hand. "We've got him, Nora. Now we just need the final piece of evidence." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from the PI. "Meeting confirmed. Sending location now." I stood up, adrenaline coursing through me. "This is it. I'm going." Marianne looked concerned. "Are you sure? I could go instead." I shook my head. "No, I need to see this with my own eyes." The drive to the motel was a blur. Rain lashed against the windshield, matching the storm in my heart. I parked across the street, my eyes fixed on room 12. At exactly 7 p.m., a familiar car pulled up. Chris stepped out, looking around furtively before knocking on the door. Angela answered, pulling him inside. I felt numb. Even after everything, a part of me had hoped it wasn't true. I raised my phone, capturing video of Chris entering the room. Suddenly, a tap on my window made me jump. It was the PI, gesturing for me to roll down the window. "Mrs. Thompson, I've got audio set up in the room. Do you want to listen?" I hesitated, then nodded. He handed me a small device with headphones. Chris's voice came through clearly. "I can't keep doing this, Angela. Nora's pregnant. I need to focus on my family." Angela's laugh was cold. "Oh, please, you've been saying that for months. Face it, Chris, you're not happy with her. You never have been." "That's not true," Chris protested weakly. "Then why are you here?" Angela challenged. There was a long pause, then the unmistakable sound of kissing. I ripped off the headphones, bile rising in my throat. I'd heard enough. As I drove home, my mind raced. I had all the evidence I needed now. But what would I do with it? Marianne was waiting when I got back. One look at my face told her everything. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug. "I'm so sorry." As I recounted what I'd seen and heard, Marianne's expression hardened. "He doesn't deserve you, Nora. It's time to take back your life." "But how?" I asked, feeling lost. "A quiet divorce? Try to keep it civil for Lily's sake?" Marianne shook her head. "No. Men like Chris, they need to be exposed. Publicly. It's the only way they learn." Her words ignited something in me. Years of suppressed anger, of putting everyone else first, of dimming my own light, it all came rushing to the surface. "You're right," I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "No more hiding. No more pretending. It's time everyone knew the truth." Marianne smiled, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "That's my girl. Now let's plan this out properly. We want maximum impact." As we strategized late into the night, a part of me wondered if this was too far. Was public humiliation really the answer? But then I thought of Lily, of the baby I was carrying. I thought of all the women who had been in my shoes, who had suffered in silence. No more. It was time to reclaim my voice, my power, my life. As Marianne and I finalized our plan, I felt a mix of exhilaration and terror. In just a few days, everything would change. There was no going back now. I placed a hand on my growing belly, whispering a promise. "We're going to be okay. Mama's going to make sure of it." The annual neighborhood block party was in full swing. Families mingled, kids ran around with sticky faces, and the air was thick with the smell of barbecue. I stood on the periphery, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Marianne appeared at my side, a reassuring presence. "Are you ready?" I nodded, unable to speak. In my hand, I clutched a USB drive containing all the evidence of Chris and Angela's affair. Photos, videos, bank statements, everything. Chris was at the grill, playing the role of perfect husband and neighbor. Angela hovered nearby, laughing too loudly at his jokes. The sight of them together made my blood boil. "Remember," Marianne whispered, "wait for my signal." I watched as she made her way to the makeshift stage where the karaoke machine was set up. She tapped the microphone, drawing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marianne announced, we have a special presentation from our very own Nora Thompson. This was it, my moment of truth. As I walked to the stage, Chris caught my eye. He smiled, oblivious to what was about to happen. I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I really going to do this? Then I saw Angela place her hand on Chris's arm, and my resolve hardened. I plugged in the USB drive and grabbed the microphone. I have a story to tell you all, I began, my voice shaky but gaining strength. A story about betrayal, lies, and the importance of truth. The crowd fell silent, sensing the gravity in my tone. Chris's smile faltered. For months I've been living a lie, I continued, pretending everything was fine while my husband carried on an affair with our neighbor. Gasps rippled through the audience. Chris's face drained of color. Angela tried to slip away, but Marianne blocked her path. I have proof, I said, pressing play on the first video. Chris and Angela's voices filled the air, discussing their secret meetings. The crowd watched in stunned silence as image after image appeared on the screen. Chris entering the motel, bank statements showing his withdrawals, text messages full of intimate details. I locked eyes with Chris. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was too stupid, too trusting? He started towards the stage. Nora, please. No, I shouted, surprising even myself with the force of my voice. You don't get to speak now. You've done enough talking behind my back. As the evidence continued to play, I saw the reactions around me. Shock, disgust, pity. Angela had collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Chris stood frozen, his world crumbling around him. But then I heard a small voice. Mommy? Lily stood at the edge of the crowd, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. My triumph turned to ash in my mouth. What had I done? I stumbled off the stage, pushing past the murmuring crowd to reach my daughter. As I scooped her up, I caught sight of Chris. The devastation on his face mirrored my own. Nora, he choked out, I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk? But it was too late. The damage was done. As I carried Lily away from the chaos, Marianne caught up with us. You did it, Nora. You showed them all. No, I cut her off, the weight of my actions crashing down on me. This wasn't right. Not like this. Marianne's expression hardened. Don't go soft now. He deserved this. I looked at Lily, clinging to me in confusion, then back at the devastation I'd left behind. Maybe he did, but Lily didn't, and neither did I. As we walked away from the party, the sounds of shock and gossip fading behind us, I realized the bitter truth. In my quest for revenge, I'd hurt the very people I was trying to protect. The triumph I'd imagined felt hollow. Instead of closure, I was left with a gnawing question. What do I do now? The days following the block party were a blur of tears, hushed conversations, and sleepless nights. Chris moved out, staying with a friend. I was left alone with Lily, trying to explain why Daddy wasn't home. One afternoon, as Lily napped, I sat in my makeshift art studio, staring at a blank canvas. For the first time in years, I felt the urge to paint. As I picked up a brush, there was a knock at the door. It was Chris, looking haggard and remorseful. Can we talk? I nodded, letting him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the weight of our broken marriage between us. I'm so sorry, Nora, Chris began, his voice cracking. What I did was unforgivable. I understand if you want a divorce. I took a deep breath. I thought I did, but seeing Lily's face that day, it made me realize revenge isn't the answer. Chris looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying we owe it to Lily and to this baby. I placed a hand on my swollen belly to try and work through this. But things have to change, Chris. I won't be taken for granted again. We talked for hours, laying everything bare. Chris's insecurities about providing for the family, my resentment at giving up my art, the breakdown in our communication. It was painful, but cathartic. I want to go to counseling, I said firmly. Both of us, together and separately, and I'm going back to painting. It's not negotiable. Chris nodded eagerly. Anything you want, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. As we talked, I felt a shift within me. The anger that had consumed me for so long began to ebb, replaced by a sense of empowerment. I wasn't just Chris's wife or Lily's mother. I was Nora, artist, woman, survivor. Weeks turned into months. Chris threw himself into therapy, taking on more responsibilities at home. I set up a proper studio and started selling my paintings online. Slowly, we rebuilt trust. One evening, as we tucked Lily into bed, she asked, "Are you and Daddy happy now?" I looked at Chris, seeing the man I fell in love with, changed but somehow stronger. We're working on it, sweetie, every day. As her due date approached, Nora found herself in her studio, working on a new piece. It was a self-portrait, not the meek housewife she'd become, but the strong, resilient woman she'd discovered. Chris appeared in the doorway, a mug of tea in hand. "That's incredible, Nora. It's so you." I smiled, really smiled for the first time in months. "It is, isn't it?" He set the tea down and wrapped his arms around me, careful of my belly. "I'm so proud of you and grateful you gave us another chance." I leaned into him, feeling our baby kick. "We've both changed, Chris. This isn't the life I imagined, but maybe it's the one we needed." As I put the finishing touches on my self-portrait, I realized that this, the messy, complicated, beautiful life we were rebuilding, was my masterpiece. The next day, I received an email from a gallery in the city. They wanted to feature my work in an upcoming show. As I shared the news with Chris, watching his face light up with genuine pride, I knew we'd be okay. Not perfect, but okay. That night, as we lay in bed, Chris's hand on my belly, I thought about the journey we'd been on. The pain, the betrayal, the near destruction of everything we'd built. But I also thought about the strength I'd found, the voice I'd reclaimed. I wasn't just Chris's wife or Lily's mother anymore. I was Nora Thompson, artist, survivor, woman reborn. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, I knew I had the strength to face them, not just for my family, but for myself. The canvas of our life wasn't perfect. It had its dark spots, its messy streaks, but it was ours, and it was beautiful in its own way. And I, Nora Thompson, was the artist holding the brush.
My name is Rose, and I'm a 34-year-old office worker. My husband, David, and I have been married for 10 years. We had a child soon after we got married, so our daughter will be turning 10 this year. It's not that I don't have any complaints about my marriage, but overall, I'm happy because my daughter has grown into such a lovely and wonderful girl. However, my main dissatisfaction with my husband revolves around money. David has a habit of spending a significant amount on his hobbies. It's not excessive, but still quite a lot. I constantly insist that he brings in just enough money to cover the household expenses, like utilities and groceries. But because he only provides the bare minimum, I've had to cut back on other costs. On top of that, I've been paying the rent, covering our daughter's school tuition, and saving for her future education with my own salary. Then, there's the issue of housework. My husband does none of it. I wanted to split the responsibilities since we both work, but he'd always say, if I do it, it'll just take longer, using that as an excuse to avoid doing anything. So, it became the norm for me to handle everything. Even after our daughter was born, he hardly participated in raising her, claiming he was afraid he might hurt her or cause an accident. As I reflected on our situation, I realized I was quite dissatisfied with David. But after 10 years of marriage and with our child growing up, I knew that divorcing while our daughter was about to enter puberty wasn't a good idea. I convinced myself that no marriage is perfect and tried to accept the distance that had grown between us. However, something happened recently that changed my mind about divorce completely. It all started with my sister-in-law. One day, she showed up at my house unexpectedly. "Rose, I'm sorry, but I need to hide here for a while." "What's going on?" I asked. "I had a bit of trouble with my husband. Let me stay here for a while." "What? Did something happen with Tom?" "No, it's just, she replied, avoiding my questions and trying to change the subject. I wasn't convinced, so I waited for David to come home. When David returned around 8 p.m., after putting our daughter to bed, we sat down with my sister-in-law to talk. "Sis, what happened?" David asked. "Well, Tom suddenly snapped and told me he wants a divorce," she said. "What?" I was surprised. Tom had always seemed like a sincere and calm man, not the type to get angry and ask for a divorce out of the blue. "Why did Tom get angry?" I pressed. "Why are you asking me that?" she snapped back. "Because I don't think Tom is the kind of person who would get angry without a reason," I replied. That's what I want to know. I couldn't help but notice that my sister-in-law seemed panicked, but if Tom was asking for a divorce, there must have been something she did to make him that angry. Rose, why are you defending Tom so much? Are you having an affair with him? She suddenly accused. Of course not. I responded, shocked. I wonder, she said suspiciously. My husband then laughed and said, no, sis, that's not possible. She doesn't even have the time for that. Besides, Rose always leaves her phone on the table. Though he was defending me, his remark irritated me. I was constantly juggling work, housework, and raising our child. I barely had time to make dinner after work, let alone look at my phone. In the end, my sister-in-law stuck to her claim. I don't know why he's angry. We couldn't get a clear answer, so my husband and I decided to talk to Tom directly. Later, when Tom came over, my sister-in-law conveniently left, saying it would be awkward to see him. As soon as Tom arrived, he politely apologized to us. I'm really sorry for causing you both so much trouble. Tom was a sincere man, and it seemed out of character for him to suddenly get angry. Why did you ask my sister for a divorce? You've only been married for a year. Isn't that a bit harsh? There must be a reason, right? I asked. She spent all of my money without permission, Tom replied. Really? How much money did you have saved? I asked. $50,000. My husband and I exchanged surprised looks. $50,000 in just 1 year. That was about $4,100 a month. And Tom had already been giving her enough from his income to cover all living expenses. So, my sister-in-law had been spending it all on her own entertainment. Naturally, Tom was furious. Who wouldn't be? I certainly would be if I were in his shoes. Staying married to someone with such reckless spending habits would be tough. Is something wrong? My husband asked when he noticed my pause. Oh, nothing. It's just, well, you have a bad spending habit too, I admitted, realizing how similar he and his sister were. If she doesn't pay back the $50,000, divorce her. You don't have kids, so it seems like a reasonable decision, my husband added. As I nodded in agreement, my husband suddenly interrupted with, okay, I'll make sure my sister pays you back. Why was he so confident about that? I didn't understand where his certainty came from, but Tom simply replied, I'd appreciate that. With that, the conversation ended, and I decided to keep an eye on the situation. Later, when my sister-in-law returned, she immediately asked, what did Tom say? Tom said you spent all of his $50,000 in savings, I answered. Oh, I used it for living expenses. I tried to explain, but he just didn't get it, she defended herself. But Tom mentioned he had a separate account specifically for living expenses, I countered. Ugh, you don't know anything, so just shut up, she snapped at me, her harsh tone cutting through the air. She had always had a habit of belittling me, but this time it was clear that Tom should divorce her. Anyway, he said he'd forgive you if you paid him back the $50,000. How can I pay back that much? I'm a housewife, my sister-in-law exclaimed. If you can't pay it back, you shouldn't have spent his money, I replied firmly. Well, sis, relax. We have money, right, Rose? My husband interjected. What are you talking about? I asked, confused. She's got $100,000 in her savings, so don't worry, sis, he continued, directing his words at his sister. So, Rose, we're counting on you. Huh? I stammered, shocked. My sister-in-law looked at me with a gleam in her eye. What the hell, Rose? How come you didn't tell me that sooner? She demanded. Wait a minute, I said, trying to process everything. First of all, how did you even know about my savings, David? I found it when I went to your parents' house, he admitted. It was in the second drawer of the closet in your room. You looked through my things without my permission. I asked, incredulous. We're married, for God's sake, he said dismissively. Anyway, your sister-in-law is in trouble, so just give us your savings. No way. I shot back. That money is for our daughter. I'm not giving it to you. You have 100,000, so just give her 50,000, he insisted. If that's the case, why don't you pay her instead? I countered. Whoever has it should pay, my husband argued. Rose, please help me. I'm in the middle of a divorce, my sister-in-law pleaded. That's none of my business. It's your fault, I said coldly. That's terrible. You don't love your family, she accused. If love means giving you money, then I don't need that kind of family love, I replied. If you don't pay me $50,000, I'll divorce you, David threatened, pulling out divorce papers from a drawer. Oh, so you've been preparing for this? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I had them ready just in case, he said nonchalantly. You have a lot of nerve trying to get your way, you know that. That's exactly what I want to say to you, I shot back. He filled out the form and said, I'm serious. We can get divorced anytime. To my surprise, my sister-in-law grinned and said, well, I'll be one of your witnesses. She then signed her name on the form. So, you can either pay me $50,000, or you can get divorced. I couldn't believe their audacity, but I decided to play along for the moment. All right, I said, pretending to give in. The next day, I brought some people to the house, my in-laws and Tom. Why are you here, Tom? And why are Mom and Dad here? My husband asked, visibly uncomfortable. I heard the story, his father said. David, don't embarrass yourself. Rose, I'm really sorry for my stupid son and daughter, my mother-in-law added, shaking her head. Tom, we owe you an apology too, she continued, addressing him. Why are you two apologizing? My sister-in-law snapped, confused. You shut up, their father said sternly. We went through your room and found tons of brown bags and jewelry. How did you find out? She stammered, clearly panicking. Tom asked me to investigate, and I did, her father explained. You've had a habit of hiding things since you were a child. Tom looked at her sadly and said, I can't stay married to you anymore, especially after you lied about using the money for living expenses. I want you to pay me back the $50,000 and divorce me, Tom demanded. Oh no, my sister-in-law whispered, realizing the gravity of the situation. And David, you're getting a divorce too, Tom continued. What? David looked shocked. Rose has already filled out the divorce papers, and I signed as a witness. We've just submitted them together, Tom explained calmly. What? I won't allow that. David exclaimed. You won't allow it. Tom shot back. What are you talking about? You threatened her with divorce and tried to make her, who had nothing to do with your sister's mess, take over the debt. That's disgusting. Rose is my wife. David protested. She's not your property, Tom replied sharply. She wasn't born into your family, she's a person, and you should have more respect and care for her. David couldn't argue with that. He hung his head, speechless. My sister-in-law, equally defeated, stood there in shock. Thanks to my in-laws, the conversation ended smoothly, and Tom and I were able to finalize our divorces without any problems. My sister-in-law ended up selling as many of her luxury items as she could, managing to repay about $20,000. The rest was covered by my in-laws, and she was put under their supervision to work from morning till night to pay them back. As for David, I arranged for him to pay child support. I heard that he moved into a cheaper apartment after struggling to cover his rent, living expenses, and child support with his salary. Despite living more modestly, his habit of wasting money persisted, leaving him constantly broke and with no savings. While he continues to pay child support, I'm not worried about him. If he keeps living like that, he'll likely be single for a long time. Meanwhile, I've moved back to my parents' home, working hard while they help take care of our daughter. My goal now is to ensure that my daughter can pursue whatever dreams she has, whenever she wants, and as much as she desires. So, I'll keep saving and nurturing her future.
I could feel the anger boiling inside me as I listened to the lewd sounds coming through Brent's phone speaker. My husband's deep, throaty groans intermingled with the unmistakable high-pitched gasps of a woman who definitely wasn't me. "Oh, Brent, you feel so good," the woman purred, her voice dripping with lust. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, but I forced myself to remain still and silent, clutching the device tightly as waves of nausea washed over me. When the call finally ended, I took a deep, shuddering breath, fighting back tears. How could he do this to me, to our family? After 15 years of marriage and giving him everything, this was how he repaid my devotion? The lies, the business trips, the unexplained credit card charges, it all made sense now. My heart pounded with a mixture of rage and devastation as I confronted the harsh reality. Brent was having an affair. I spent the rest of that night pacing restlessly, my mind racing as I replayed the sordid conversation over and over. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and hurl accusations. But the other part knew I needed to stay calm, to gather evidence before he inevitably denied everything. When Brent finally returned home 2 days later, I steeled myself, forcing a tight-lipped smile as he bounded through the door with his usual charisma. "Hey, babe, I missed you." He pulled me into an embrace, his aftershave filling my nostrils and making me gag silently. I returned the hug stiffly, all the while imagining wrapping my hands around his lying throat and squeezing until his deceptive tongue lolled out. "Everything okay?" he asked, sensing my tension. His concerned facade only fueled my fury. "Just tired?" I lied smoothly, mirroring the ease with which he'd clearly been deceiving me. "Welcome home." As he headed upstairs to shower, I felt a surge of resolve coursing through me. I would uncover every sordid detail of Brent's betrayal. And when I did, he would face the consequences, severe, brutal consequences, for shattering the sacred vows he had sworn to me. Brent's carefree whistling echoed down the stairwell, but I heard only the faint rumblings of Karma's approach, slowly gathering like an inescapable storm on the horizon. I took a deep breath and steeled myself before entering the living room. Phone in hand with the damning recording queued up, Brent was lounging on the couch, idly flipping through channels. "We need to talk," I stated firmly. He glanced up with a bemused expression. "What's up, babe?" Rather than answering, I hit play on the audio file. The unmistakable sounds of his aroused groans and the mystery woman's breathy moans filled the air. Brent's face drained of color as the recording played. When it finished, I fixed him with a cold stare. "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" He opened and closed his mouth wordlessly for a moment, before regaining his composure. "Candace, that was just a stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that was a one-time slip-up?" Brent rose from the couch, hands raised placatingly. "Baby, I swear, it was nothing but a drunken fling during that conference in Phoenix. It'll never happen again." "Don't lie to me," I shouted, nostrils flaring. "I know about the hotel receipts, the suspicious credit card charges. How long has this been going on?" He shook his head vehemently. "No, you've got it all wrong." "Save it," I cut him off, feeling disgusted. "I can't even look at you right now." Turning on my heel, I stormed out of the room, slamming the door to the guest bedroom behind me. I collapsed onto the bed, hot tears of anger and humiliation streaming down my cheeks. How dare he try to gaslight me, to make me feel crazy for catching him red-handed? My body shook with rage at the thought of all the lies, all the times he had smiled in my face while carrying on a tawdry affair behind my back. But I refused to be the victim anymore. I would expose Brent for the unfaithful snake that he was, gathering undeniable proof to shove in his smug face. Over the next few weeks, I documented everything, poring over bank statements, installing tracking software on his phone and computer, even hiring a private investigator to follow his movements. The evidence mounted rapidly. Hotel receipts, incriminating emails and texts, even video footage of him kissing and groping the woman, who I learned was his co-worker Amber, in a dimly lit parking garage. When I finally amassed the extensive file, I waited until Brent was home from another one of his frequent business trips. Dylan was spending the night at a friend's, giving us privacy. "We're through," I stated coldly, tossing the thick manila envelope onto the coffee table in front of Brent. "I know everything." His eyes went wide as he flipped through the photos, videos, documents, and other proof within. "Candace, I can explain." I held up a hand, silencing him. "Save your breath. The lies stop now." For the first time, Brent seemed to realize I wasn't bluffing or exaggerating. The smug mask slipped, revealing the cowering coward underneath. What are you going to do?" he asked meekly. A vindictive smile crossed my lips as I leaned back in my chair. "Don't you worry," I purred darkly. "You're about to face some severe consequences." Despite the mountain of evidence I had gathered proving his infidelity, Brent continued to deny and downplay his affair with Amber. Lie after shameless lie poured from his mouth as he desperately tried to gaslight me into doubting the truth right in front of my eyes. "It was just a fling, a stupid mistake," he would claim, as if that absolved him of betraying his marriage vows. Other times he would insist, "We're just friends. There's nothing going on." I wanted to scream at the blatant falsehoods. How dare he treat me like an imbecile after I had caught him red-handed? Part of me was tempted to leak the evidence online for the world to see, to utterly humiliate him. But I held back, knowing I needed to bide my time for the perfect moment to strike. In the meantime, I began compiling an even more extensive file on Brent's misdeeds. I installed hidden cameras and microphones around the house, recording his every move. Our teenage son Dylan even helped, using his tech skills to hack into Brent's emails and messaging apps. "I can't believe Dad would do this," Dylan said sadly one day after uncovering yet another explicit exchange between Brent and his mistress. I pulled my son into a tight hug, my heart breaking for the disillusionment he was experiencing at such a young age. "I'm so sorry you had to find out this way," I told him gently. "But we can't let your father's lies tear this family apart. We have to fight back." Dylan nodded resolutely. "Don't worry, Mom. We're going to take that cheating scumbag down." With my son's help, the file on Brent's indiscretions grew thicker by the day. Incriminating photos, videos, emails, credit card statements, we collected it all, documenting his every transgression in preparation to obliterate his life. But still, Brent persisted in lying through his teeth whenever I confronted him, doubling down on his fabrications with almost sociopathic ease. "You're being paranoid and crazy," he would snap whenever I tried to reason with him. "There's no one else. You're imagining things." The gaslighting was maddening, making me question my own sanity at times despite the overwhelming proof I possessed. How could someone I had loved and trusted for so long deceive me so callously? The final straw came at Brent's family reunion over 4th of July weekend. As we mingled with his relatives at the backyard barbecue, I watched in horrified disgust as he blatantly flirted with Amber right in front of me, his wandering hands leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Rage boiled in my veins as I stormed over and shoved him away from the smirking woman. "Get your hands off my husband, you home-wrecking whore!" I shouted, the vicious words ripping from my throat before I could stop them. Brent tried to defuse the situation, laughing it off as a misunderstanding to his oblivious family members. But I was done playing his game. Grabbing the thick file from my purse, I flung it down on the picnic table, photos and documents spilling out, displaying the lurid evidence for all to see. "Take a good look, everyone," I spat venomously, whirling on my astonished in-laws. "This is the kind of man your son really is, a lying, cheating scumbag who's been having an affair with this woman for over a year." Pandemonium erupted as Brent's relatives gasped and shouted in shock and anger. But I didn't care. I was past the point of protecting him or preserving his pristine reputation. He had made his bed, and now it was time to lie in it, no matter how publicly humiliating the consequences would be. The backyard erupted into chaos as I exposed Brent's sordid affair to his entire family. His parents and siblings recoiled in shock and disgust, gawking at the incriminating photos and documents strewn across the picnic table. "How could you, Brent?" his mother wailed, burying her face in her hands. "After everything your father and I did for you." Brent's dad shook his head slowly, a look of utter revulsion on his weathered face. "You're a disgrace, son. I didn't raise you to be this kind of man." But Brent didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He simply sneered at me with contempt blazing in his eyes. "You crazy bitch," he snarled, spit flying from his lips. "You're going to regret this." Before anyone could react, he lunged across the table and grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking me towards him until our faces were mere inches apart. The stench of beer and barbecue sauce wafted from his mouth as he hissed, "You think you've won? This isn't over." I stared defiantly into his crazed eyes, refusing to show fear despite my heart thundering in my chest. "I'm done with your lies, Brent. Our marriage is over, and so are you." Dylan suddenly appeared, shoving his father away from me with surprising force. "Get your hands off her!" he shouted, positioning himself protectively in front of me. Brent stumbled backwards, nearly toppling the table with the evidence in his drunken rage. Amber was at his side in an instant, clinging to his arm. "Come on, baby, let's get out of here," she crooned, shooting me a smug look over her shoulder. A chorus of outraged shouts and insults followed them as they stormed away. Brent's brother Chris stepped towards me, shaking his head in disbelief. "I'm so sorry, Candace," he murmured, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "If we had known, this is unforgivable." I nodded mutely, fighting back tears as the gravity of the situation hit me. My life as I knew it was over, but it was a life built on lies and deceit anyway. As much as it hurt, I knew I was doing the right thing. In the days that followed, the rest of Brent's family reached out in turn to express their shock and lend their support. Even his own parents, initially defensive of their son, came to realize the extent of his betrayal as they pored over the damning proof I had gathered. We had no idea he was capable of such depravity, Brent's mother told me, her voice laced with a heartbroken waver. "You didn't deserve any of this." I accepted their apologies stoically, appreciative of their kindness, yet numb to offering any absolution for Brent's actions. As far as I was concerned, he had committed the ultimate sin by breaking his sacred vows, and he would pay dearly for it. True to his vile nature, Brent remained utterly unrepentant in the aftermath of his exposure, attempting to gaslight and manipulate me into doubting the truth yet again. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," he claimed during one heated argument, his arrogance infuriating. "It was just a fling, it's not that serious." I could barely contain my fury as I hurled his words back in his face. "Not that serious? You disrespected me, your family, our entire marriage vows, all for some cheap fling with a woman you couldn't even be faithful to." Brent's eyes narrowed to slits as he stepped towards me, his body tensed with menace. "You'll regret this," he growled, each word dripping with venom. "I'm going to make you suffer for humiliating me like this." But I refused to be intimidated by his empty threats any longer. I had the truth on my side now, along with his own flesh and blood, who had disowned him for his disgusting misdeeds. "No, Brent," I replied coldly, staring him down with flinching. "The only one suffering will be you. I'm going to destroy every single part of your pathetic life, and I'm going to make sure you deserve every agonizing second of it." After the explosive confrontation at Brent's family reunion, there was no going back. The bridges had been burned, the truth laid bare for all to see. His parents disowned him, his siblings wanted nothing to do with him, even his own flesh and blood had turned their backs in utter disgust. But Brent didn't seem fazed by the fallout. If anything, he seemed to revel in the chaos, lashing out with bitter vitriol and doubling down on his reprehensible behavior. "They're all a bunch of self-righteous hypocrites." He sneered when I informed him that his parents were cutting him off financially. "I don't need their money or their fake love." His callousness was appalling, devoid of any remorse for the devastation he had wrought. It became increasingly clear that appealing to his humanity was a fruitless endeavor. He simply had none left. As the divorce proceedings began, Brent fought me viciously on every front, determined to make me suffer, even as the world crumbled around him. He drained our joint accounts, attempted to hide assets, and even leveled false accusations in an effort to turn our son Dylan against me. "Your mother's a lying, vindictive snake," he hissed after I caught him trying to manipulate Dylan. "Don't let her turn you against your own father." But Dylan wasn't having any of it. Now 17, he had witnessed firsthand the depths of Brent's depravity and betrayal. If anything, it had strengthened the bond between my son and I, a united front against his father's toxic influence. "I don't know who you are anymore, Dad," Dylan said sadly, shaking his head. "But I want no part of this ugliness." With each despicable act, each pathetic attempt to drag us all down with him, my rage toward Brent calcified into an icy, simmering hatred. I found myself obsessively strategizing, plotting out every move to obliterate him, financially, socially, psychologically. It became my singular driving force, a all-consuming quest to make him feel even an ounce of the pain and humiliation he had inflicted upon me and our family. Brent's smug arrogance would be his undoing. I would savor every moment of stripping that away as he lost everything. When the judge ultimately ruled in my favor, awarding me the house and primary custody of Dylan, Brent remained defiant, even as his life crumbled around him. "This isn't over, you psychotic bitch," he snarled, spittle flying as he was led away by the bailiffs. "I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me." His threats might have once filled me with dread, but now I simply laughed in his bloated, twisted face. "Regret?" I called out mockingly. "I'm just getting started, Brent. This is only the beginning of what you deserve." And I meant every word. Exposing his lies and driving away his family and friends was just the opening salvo. I had so much more in store for the man who had so callously shattered the sacred vows between us. As I watched him being dragged away, I felt a savage sense of satisfaction, of karma being served, however cruelly. This was precisely what he deserved after the turmoil and devastation he had wrought with his selfish actions. Turning away, I wrapped an arm around Dylan's shoulders, the two of us standing united against the storm Brent had unleashed through his sins. There would be no remorse, no looking back. Only the total and complete obliteration of the man who had dared to betray our family's trust in the most unforgivable way. Whatever revenge lay ahead, he had more than earned every agonizing second of it. With the divorce finalized and Brent out of our home, I could finally turn my full attention to systematically dismantling every aspect of his miserable life. He thought he had been through hell already? He had no idea what fresh agonies awaited him. My first target was his career at the prestigious corporate firm where he had been employed for over a decade. Brent had always taken immense pride in his position and paycheck, lording his success over others as proof of his importance. Well, it was time to strip that arrogance away once and for all. Utilizing the evidence I had gathered of his affair with Amber, I compiled a comprehensive file documenting how he had been neglecting his duties and misusing company resources to facilitate his indiscretions. Explicit photos, video recordings, emails, all of it, tallying up the sordid details of his unprofessional conduct. I also enlisted the aid of an old friend, a skilled hacker who owed me a favor, to covertly access the company's internal communications and HR files. With his help, I was able to insert the incriminating dossier directly into their systems, ensuring it would be found. Within a week, the firm's CEO himself was calling Brent into his office, the file of evidence splayed out on the desk between them. "What is the meaning of this, Brent?" The CEO's voice could be heard saying sternly over the recording I had my hacker obtain. "This is utterly unacceptable behavior for one of our senior executives. Sir, I can explain." Brent stuttered, suddenly sounding very small. "Explain what?" the CEO interrupted sharply. "These photos, videos, all this proof of you carrying on illicit affairs and neglecting your responsibilities, using company property for your indecent trysts?" There was a pause, and I could practically see Brent squirming in discomfort. Good. Let him feel just an ounce of the shame and humiliation he deserved. "You're fired, effective immediately," the CEO stated, his voice laced with finality and disgust. "Security will escort you off the premises. I want you gone within the hour." The recording clicked off, and I felt a savage surge of satisfaction. That high-paying job, that status and sense of self-worth Brent derived from his career, all of it gone in an instant, because of his own reprehensible actions. But I wasn't done by any means. No, this was just the start of his downfall. Next, I recruited Dylan's help to release the entire file across Brent's social media accounts and professional networking sites like LinkedIn. Within hours, the lurid details of his infidelity went viral as outraged friends, family, and colleagues shared and reacted in shock and horror. Amber's husband even reached out, thanking me profusely after discovering the truth about his wife's tawdry dalliances. Their divorce proceedings began immediately. As for Brent, his phone was blowing up constantly with anguished texts and voice messages from all corners of his life. Parents disowning him, friends cutting ties, colleagues aghast at his indecent behavior. In one particularly satisfying instance, I patched his mother's tearful tirade onto the house speakers so we could both savor every blistering second of it. "You were my pride and joy," the woman wept brokenly. "But now, you're nothing to me, nothing but a filthy, immoral disappointment." I could see it all clicking into place for Brent in that moment, the total and complete ruination I had meticulously orchestrated. His entire world was crumbling into ashes before his very eyes. When he finally looked up at me with naked fear and loathing, I simply smiled. "Like I told you before," I said calmly, "this is only the beginning of what you deserve." With Brent's career, reputation, and family ties in ruins, I turned my sights to obliterating what little he had left, his finances and assets. He would be left with nothing, forced to start from less than zero after the hell I put him through. It began with liquidating our joint accounts and investment portfolios that I had access to through our marriage. Hundreds of thousands of dollars drained in a matter of days, transferred discreetly to offshore holdings where he could never trace it. "What did you do?" Brent demanded frantically when he realized our nest egg was gone. "Where's all our money?" I simply smiled placidly. "Considering how I earned every penny of that while you were gallivanting with your whores, I'd say it's finders keepers." His face purpled with rage, but I was prepared for his outburst. With a flick of my wrist, I produced a crisp manila envelope, a dossier detailing every single asset in his name that I intended to systematically demolish. "This is just a taste of what's coming for you," I said coolly. "You're going to lose it all by the time I'm through." True to my word, I deployed every underhanded tactic in the book to unravel the few holdings Brent had managed to siphon away and hide from me. With Dylan's tech-savvy assistance, we relentlessly hacked and probed until we discovered every last possession he tried to salt away. The classic '68 Mustang he had lovingly restored? Reported as a stolen vehicle until it was seized. The private investment funds he had stashed overseas? Drained away by my hacker contacts until not a cent remained. Even the house he tried to rent after being forced from our marital home. I made sure the landlord received an anonymous tip that Brent was an adulterer of the worst kind. He was kicked out within a month. With each successive blow I landed, stripping away his assets and driving him towards bankruptcy, the fight seemed to gradually drain from Brent's body. What was once a sneering, arrogant puffery became a hunched, haggard shell of a man. He would call or text me at all hours, devolving from bitter threats to pathetic pleadings as his life crumbled around him. "Candace, please?" He sobbed one night during a tear-filled voicemail. "I'm so sorry for what I did. You have to stop this. I have nothing left. I'll be destitute." I listened to the message impassively before deleting it without a shred of remorse. Brent's suffering was a calculated, perfectly engineered campaign, and it was nowhere near finished. When his car was finally repossessed and his cell phone cut off for lack of payment, he started showing up at my doorstep, begging to be let inside. "I have nowhere to go," he wailed, pounding on the door with gnarly fists. "You've taken everything from me. Why are you doing this?" I watched him through the security camera, taking perverse satisfaction in his total and complete debasement. This was the great Brent Connors, the corporate hotshot and arrogant cheater, reduced to a sniveling, desperate husk. When Dylan emerged from his room to see what the commotion was, I waved him off. "Don't bother," I told my son calmly. "He's just reaping what he's sown. That's all." My final salvo came in the form of a massive data dump to the IRS. Records upon records of Brent's financial misdeeds, from tax evasion to money laundering. Within days, the authorities were at his ramshackle motel room with warrants and cuffs. The sight of his utter humiliation as they hauled him away almost made the entire grueling process worth it. Almost. Months passed as the full weight of my revenge campaign against Brent took hold. With each day that went by, he plummeted further into the abyss of destitution and ruin I had meticulously constructed. The corporate job, the money, the family, the home, it had all been systematically stripped away through my calculated efforts. Even his freedom was temporarily revoked after that IRS raid, though his high-priced lawyers managed to get the charges reduced to a slap on the wrist. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Brent was a shell of his former arrogant self, having lost every single thing that had once brought him swagger and self-worth. I savored every agonizing second as the proud, selfish man who had so callously shattered his marriage vows was ground down into broken submission. This was karma's bitter reward for his sins against me and our family. Dylan and I, meanwhile, were finally able to start fresh without the toxic weight of Brent's betrayal dragging us down. With my revenge complete and his own misdeeds having alienated him from everyone he knew, he was officially expunged from our lives like the cancer he was. We moved from our old home into a new place, a clean slate for just the two of us to begin rebuilding. Dylan seemed to thrive without his father's negative influence, excelling in school and landing a prestigious internship in software engineering. As for me, I had never felt more liberated and vindicated. The rage that had fueled my quest for vengeance had burned itself out, leaving only a sense of tranquility and peace in its wake. That is, until the incessant phone calls and unwanted visits began. At first, Brent's attempts to reach out were easy enough to ignore. Drunken voicemails pleading for mercy or hurling bitter curses that he had brought upon himself. I would simply delete the messages without a second thought. But then he started showing up in person, loitering outside our new home or accosting us in public with his disheveled, haunted appearance. Each time I saw that sunken, desperate look in his roomy eyes, any lingering pity I might have felt quickly evaporated. "I have nothing left because of you," he sobbed during one such confrontation outside the grocery store. "You've destroyed me completely." Grabbing my arm with shocking force, Brent stared at me with an almost feral desperation. "Please, give me another chance," he begged hoarsely. "I'll do anything, Candace. Anything to get my life back." I could feel Dylan tense beside me, ready to intervene, but I simply wrenched my arm free of Brent's grasp and stared at him with utter contempt. "Your life?" I spat out a bitter laugh. "This is exactly what you deserve after throwing away the life we had for some cheap fling. You did this to yourself." Brent opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off with a savage glare. "I gave you chance after chance to come clean, to make things right," I said, voice low and laced with venom. "But you just couldn't stop lying and cheating, could you? You chose this path, and I made sure you suffered every agonizing step of the way." Straightening up, I turned and began walking back towards the car where Dylan waited, leaving Brent crumpled on the sidewalk like the pathetic, broken shell of a man he had become. As we drove off, I felt an immense weight finally lift from my shoulders. The long, arduous road towards justice and reclaiming my life had finally reached its conclusion. Brent was neutralized, relegated to a cautionary tale of how swiftly karma can dismantle even the proudest of narcissists. I looked over at Dylan, my strong, resilient son, and smiled. We had each other, and that was enough to forge ahead into our new chapter, free of Brent's toxicity at long last. No more looking back, only moving forward, towards the fresh start this long overdue vengeance had afforded us.
My savings, which I have accumulated through hard work since my single days, were meant to be untouched for our children's future. I never expected those savings to be used for such a thing. Just because we're married doesn't mean anything goes. My name is Alyssa, and I'm 32 years old. I married Greg when I was 24, and I got pregnant soon after. We now have 2 children. My son is 7 and my daughter is 5. Both are growing up healthy without any major illnesses. When my daughter turned 3, I returned to my previous job. 2 years have passed since I resumed work, and now I earn about the same salary as Greg. Since he only contributes the bare minimum to our living expenses, I have to save for myself and our children from my own salary. I really wish Greg would cooperate more. However, whenever I bring up money, he always looks annoyed and even gets grumpy with the children. So, I've stopped talking about money in front of him. Then one day, my sister-in-law Megan came to our house. I happened to be working from home that day. "Alyssa, please. Let me stay with you for a while." As soon as I opened the door, Megan burst into tears and clung to me. Confused by the suddenness, I was perplexed. "Wait, what's going on? My husband wants a divorce." "What? A divorce?" Megan was still single when Greg and I got married. And she only got married a year ago to a man who seemed very kind and worked for a corporation. They looked so happy at their wedding. But now, just a year later, they are talking about divorce. I couldn't just leave her crying, so I let her into the house. I decided to hear her out first. "Well, Megan, I know it's tough, but why suddenly a divorce?" Sniffling, Megan opened up. "I haven't done anything wrong. But he suddenly says he can't stand living with me anymore." "Isn't that terrible?" "What? Your husband said that. Don't you think it's awful?" "You must think I'm pitiable, right, Alyssa?" She pressed me intensely, making me feel undue pressure. However, it's hard to believe that her kind husband would propose divorce without any reason. I managed to calm her down and decided to wait for Greg to come home from work. When Greg returned, we put the kids to bed and started discussing with Megan. "So, Megan, why has it come to divorce?" As Greg asked, Megan began crying again. "I want to know that too. I've been working hard for him all this time. And yet, he says it's impossible to live with you. Isn't that cruel?" Despite her saying that, there's no way her husband would come up with such an idea without a reason. Listening to her alone won't solve anything. Megan has always had a selfish and willful side. That might be why this divorce is happening. "Well, Megan, are you sure there's really no reason at all? Your husband isn't the type to be unreasonable." As I gently defended her husband, Megan glared at me sharply. "What, Alyssa? Are you taking his side over mine? I've been working hard as a wife. And yet he's pushing me towards divorce." "No. It's not about taking sides. But I doubt he would bring up divorce without any reason. What do you know about him, Alyssa? You're defending him too much." After a pause, Megan looked at me suspiciously. "Oh, don't tell me, Alyssa, you're not having an affair with him, are you?" "What? No way." Oh my, the conversation has taken a strange turn. Of course, there's nothing untoward between Megan's husband and me. I don't even have his contact information. Thankfully, Greg also chimed in. "Megan, that's not possible." "Don't worry." And I felt a bit relieved. Still, it's curious. Despite Megan claiming she worked hard as a wife, she is vague about why she is facing divorce. I asked Greg to urgently invite his brother over. Megan had already left, saying she didn't want to meet him. Upon arrival, Megan's husband apologized right away, saying, "Sorry for causing trouble for you too." I decided to delve into the details because it seemed unlikely such a reasonable person would ask for a divorce without cause. "Well, I'm sorry to ask so suddenly, But why did you bring up divorce with Megan? Megan's husband looked troubled and looked down. Did you perhaps cheat on her? Hey, Greg. How can you say such a thing? I scolded Greg for his inappropriate comment. After a moment, Megan's husband finally spoke up. Actually, Megan has spent all of my savings, about $50,000. $50,000. I exclaimed, shocked by the amount. He hadn't been upfront because it involved money, which isn't a pretty topic. $50,000. What did she spend it on? I asked cautiously, and he sighed deeply. I asked her, but she only said it was for living expenses. I've been giving her a fixed amount every month for living expenses. But she said it wasn't enough. Feeling apologetic, I thought to myself, it's believable Megan would do this. Because she had also nonchalantly asked us for money during her single days. She'd say, "We're family, right?" and even went through my wallet without asking. Knowing this side of Megan, I found her husband's story all too plausible. He slumped in disappointment. If she can explain what she spent my savings on and agrees to repay it, I'd consider pausing the divorce. But she keeps insisting it was for living expenses. I felt terribly sorry for Megan's husband. They don't even have children. And he was giving Megan an allowance. It's suspicious that she spent $50,000 in just a year. Eventually, Greg spoke up. So, if she returns the money, the divorce could be avoided? Yeah. Got it, I'll talk to her about it. Greg took on the responsibility, but I wondered how Megan, a homemaker, planned to repay the money. I wondered if he was going to repay in place of her. After sending Megan's husband off, Megan returned home. What happened? What did he say? As Megan bombarded him with questions, Greg confidently replied, "If you return the $50,000 you spent, he won't ask for a divorce." To which Megan firmly responded, "How could I possibly have that kind of money? I only used it for living expenses and did nothing wrong." It's unclear if Megan really spent it all on living expenses. But her insistence that she's completely blameless is troubling. Megan's husband's decision to propose divorce seems reasonable. Just then, Greg said something outrageous. "Don't worry, Megan, Alyssa has lots of savings." What? I exclaimed involuntarily as my money was taken for granted. Megan's eyes lit up as she turned to me. Really? Alyssa, you should have said something sooner. No way, this is wrong. What are they even saying? Especially Greg, damn husband. He can't just decide to use someone else's savings. After cursively reprimanding them in my mind, I calmed down and firmly declined. Well, I can't lend you my savings. If you really need money, ask Greg. Upon hearing this, Greg inexplicably lashed out. Hey Alyssa. Megan is really struggling. Don't you want to help her? Exactly, Alyssa. With your savings, I could avoid divorcing my husband. Both Greg and Megan were now spouting nonsense, proving they were indeed siblings. I genuinely sympathized with Megan's husband and thought it might be better for him to get a divorce sooner rather than later. Greg, not liking my stance, exploded again. Are you serious, Alyssa? When my sister, our family, is struggling, you can't even lend just $50,000. Just $50,000. When he said that, something inside me snapped. I felt my body heat up as anger surged through me. Just $50,000. Don't be ridiculous. This money, I saved up from my single days. Why should I use it for your sister who squandered her husband's money? I've always said it's for our children's future. I managed to hold back my trembling body. Megan stood there with her mouth agape, overwhelmed. Greg looked shocked but quickly retorted. Well, you can just save up again. Megan needs that money now. Are you kidding me? I don't care. I spat back fiercely. Then you lend her the money if it's so important. You're her real sibling. And isn't it embarrassing to ask your wife to solve your sister's problems? What? Greg turned red with anger, biting his lip, unable to respond. Fine. I want a divorce from such a heartless woman. Divorce? You mean you and me? That's right. I don't need a heartless woman who won't help family. Suddenly, he rummaged through a drawer and pulled out divorce papers. He signed them and stamped them right in front of me. Here, sign this quickly. So he kept such documents just in case. I was worried about our children. Taking them away from their father was concerning. He smirked at me, perhaps thinking I wouldn't go through with it. You can't do it, can you? You wouldn't dare become a single mother suddenly. Would you? Better to lend my sister the $50,000, right? At that moment, everything became irrelevant. I was done. Better to be a single mother than to deal with such ridiculous siblings. I signed the divorce papers and stamped them. What? Alyssa. He seemed truly shocked that I had signed. Tomorrow, I'll file these. I started packing my things and the kids silently. Greg, panicking, asked, Alyssa, you're really going to file that? Of course. Why wouldn't I? Why so casually? Didn't you give it to me to sign first? Well, yes, but... The next morning, I submitted the divorce papers to the court first thing. Greg and Megan probably hadn't slept much, as they looked completely worn out. I told the children, let's go to Grandpa and Grandma's house, and prepared them for the move. It seemed cruel to suddenly tell them about the divorce, especially since they are still so young. I planned to explain things to them calmly and simply once we had settled down a bit. When I was leaving with the children, Greg had tears in his eyes. Alyssa, you're coming back, right? This isn't really going to end in divorce, is it? But it is. It's too late to cancel it now. From now on, please indulge your beloved sister to your heart's content and support each other. I said this with heavy sarcasm, throwing the words back at him. However, I truly felt sorry for the children. Due to our selfish reasons, they were losing their father and the home they had lived in. Nevertheless, if I had continued to let those two dictate my life, my savings would have been devoured. And even the future of these children would have been at risk. I refused to have my life thrown into disarray by such unreasonable siblings. I moved back to my parents' house, where I explained the situation and asked to stay for a while. After explaining things in simple terms, the children accepted the situation, saying, as long as Mom is with us, that's fine. And Mom has always been there for us. Greg kept contacting me persistently after that, but now I block all his calls. The divorce has already been finalized, and I plan to hire a lawyer to ensure child support payments. Meanwhile, Megan and her husband also divorced soon after. She claimed to have used the savings for living expenses, but it turned out she had been splurging on luxury brands. When Megan's husband secretly searched her room, he was shocked to find a large stash of luxury goods. As a result, she was forced into divorce. and had to reimburse the $50,000 she had spent, without mercy. She managed to return about $20,000 with what was left of Greg's modest savings. But she will have to work to pay back the remaining $30,000. Now that the divorce is settled, I have to pay the property division. Please help me. She tried to appeal to her parents with her usual crying antics. But since I had already explained everything to them, they quickly refused her. Not only Megan, but Greg too was severely reprimanded. And they both ended up being disowned. Really, those siblings are beyond saving. At least I hope they manage without causing trouble for others. I'm truly glad that Greg and Megan didn't end up taking it from me. I will continue to use this money carefully to ensure my children grow up well.